All right, well, today we're going to do a video on fire safety. This is things you can do at home to be safer and more prepared and hopefully prevent fires happening. So let's start by saying and talking about what is fire and what does fire need to be a fire? Well, you may have heard of something called the fire triangle, and it's a simple way to think about what fire needs and what makes fire fire. So it needs fuel, that's something to burn, whether that's wood, paper, grease, gasoline, cloth, anything that can burn is the fuel. Then it needs oxygen. Fire is alive. Fire needs to breathe, just like you and me. So it needs oxygen. Then it needs heat. It needs something to start it all off. So whether that's a match, electricity, like from a plug or an outlet or a lightning bolt, or something hot, a magnifying glass using the sun's energy, anything like that. Let's start by looking at fuel. So again, fuel is anything that can burn. So if we're talking about fire safety, we want to get rid of fuel sources that are extra. So the fire will need fuel to burn. So if we want to light a candle, the wick and the wax, that's the fuel, right? The wick pulls the wax up, and that's what burns. We want to keep everything else away from that fire. So you can see in the two pictures here, we have a candle on a metal stand or kind of a tray, and we have the match lighting the candle. There's nothing else around it to burn. We only want the fuel that we want to burn to be on fire. Whereas the other picture, you see all these candles, they have a whole bunch of flammable stuff around them. Pine cones or pine needles, maybe paper, Christmas cards, things like that. Once that wax melts and drips out onto all of that other flammable material, you're going to have an uncontrolled fire. You're going to have the fire burning fuel that you don't want it to burn. And let's look at the next set of pictures we have. We have a very, very dirty stove. So there's bits of food on it. There's grease. You can see marks of previous fires and burns on that stove. Lots and lots of fuel that can catch fire. And you don't want that fuel catching fire. We just want the burners where the natural gas comes out in that picture. That's the only fuel we want to burn. Everything else should be nice and clean. If you look at the picture to the right of that, it's a nice clean stovetop. So you have the electric elements that will get hot. We want those to get hot and to heat up our food in our pans, but the rest of the stove we want to keep clean. Let's look at the bottom pictures. What are these things made of? Now you see that one person drinking their cocoa or tea they just probably made on the stove. Now the stove is nice and clean. That's great. Everything's clean around it. Nothing hanging over the stove, no towels nearby the stove. But look at what that person is wearing. A big, fleecy, comfy thing. And that would be very, very flammable. So if there was an open flame or a hot burner on that stove and that big, floppy, fleecy sleeve touched it, it would quickly melt or catch fire and injure this person and start a fire. So look at what things are made of. In the other pictures, you see there's a good picture. The person has their sleeve rolled up. And in the not so good picture, their sleeve is dangling and hanging down. And it could catch fire or burn them. So look at what things are made of. Just like if you've been in scouts or if you've ever sat close to a campfire. If you're wearing your fleece and a spark comes off that campfire, it's going to quickly burn a hole right through your fleece. But if you have your scout blanket or your scout, it's kind of like your poncho, a blanket with a hole cut in it that you put over your head while you're by the campfire, or wrap yourself in a wool blanket, that scout blanket is made of wool. If the spark comes off that fire and hits that wool, it won't burn through it. So think about what things are made of and dress appropriately, especially around the stove. You might also want to have some oven mitts on because they're meant to hold things that are very hot. So look at what things are made of and don't let your clothes get near a source of heat, whether you're lighting a candle. Look at your clothing. Big baggy sleeves of fleecy material are bad. What about oxygen? Well, you may have done this experiment before where you take a candle, you put it in a jar, you light the candle, and then you put the lid on the jar. Pretty soon the candle will go out because it's used up the oxygen that's inside that jar. And without the oxygen, it can't breathe. The same is true for a pot on the stove. If you have a frying pan and you're frying something in grease and it catches fire, or the item in the pan catches fire, if you put a lid over that pan, it will burn up all the oxygen, use it all up, and then the fire will go out. So it's always a good idea when you're cooking to have the lid for whatever pot you're using, have that lid nearby so that if something does happen to catch fire, you can cover it. You don't ever want to put water on a grease fire. So if the item in your pan, or if there's grease or butter or oil in your pan that you're cooking with and something catches fire, if you were to throw water on it, it would just splash. And the grease, the flaming grease or flaming oil would float on top of the water and it would get splashed all over the place and it could burn you or could start other fires. So don't put water on a grease fire. You do want to cover it with a lid. That'll get rid of the oxygen. Or if you have a fire extinguisher nearby, you can use that to put out the fire. Or baking soda or salt. Now on the baking soda is sodium bicarbonate, and that's the same stuff that's in the fire extinguishers. So not only do you need baking soda for cooking, it's good just to have in the kitchen. It's good to have in your fridge to help with odors. And it's good just to leave by your stove and your cooktop so that if you do happen to have a fire, it's right there. You don't have to go racing around trying to find the baking soda. So have a lid and have the baking soda ready. So again, never put water on a grease fire, and do use a lid, baking soda, you could use salt, or your fire extinguisher. Have that stuff ready. Be prepared. Heat. Well, you could have heat from the element on a stove, or it could be natural gas. You could have a fireplace. Now let's look at that fireplace. Again, we don't want it to have fuel, so look at the material that's on the floor underneath that fireplace. Tile. That's not going to burn. If a spark comes out of that fireplace, it won't burn the tile. If you had a wood floor, it might. If you had a big rug or carpet under that, it would burn it. I know my fireplace, I have a big steel plate that sits underneath it. That match is a heat source to light that candle. We see a little space heater in that picture. That's throwing off an awful lot of heat. If a towel or something, a blanket fell over that space heater, it would probably quickly catch fire. Electrical fire. You can see that cord flaming that's plugged in. And the other one, the electricity one, again, that cord was underneath that carpet. And you can see that the cord had heated up. You can see the burning and the charring on the cord and the burning on the carpet. That's why they say never run cords under a carpet because it causes it to heat up even more. So those are some sources of heat. Mitigation. So again, what's mitigation? Mitigation means to reduce either the chance of something happening or to reduce the damage if something does happen. So let's look at some pictures and see, would this reduce the chance of something happening or would it reduce the damage? Well, let's look here. In the bottom left picture, we have a smoke detector. Now, would a smoke detector reduce the chance of a fire starting? No. It doesn't do anything to reduce the chance of a fire. Could it reduce the impact? Well, yes, because it could alert you in the very early stages to a fire. So it might say, the alarm goes off and you hear it, and you could go in and maybe put that fire out when it's still very small before it grew. The fire extinguisher. Again, a fire extinguisher won't prevent a fire from starting, but if that fire does start, you can quickly put it out. Door open versus door closed. So do you sleep at night with your bedroom door open or closed? The majority of people in a house fire are killed by the smoke, not the heat or the flames. So again, we want to give ourselves maximum time and protection. So you can see the two rooms there. in this test, and the one, they kept the door closed. You can see a wee bit of smoke and kind of discoloration by the tops of the door. So there's a fire on the other side of that door. But look at how nice and clean and white that room is. Now the other one, that had the door open and the fire was started again in the hallway outside. But look at all the soot and damage and smoke and charring in that one. So if you were asleep in that room with the door open, that smoke would have come in, probably come all the way down to where you're sleeping, and you probably would have died from smoke inhalation. You might not have ever even known there was a fire. So if the door is closed, it buys you time for the smoke alarm to go off, and it lets you get out, hopefully, of the house. Now let's look at the stovetop. Now this could prevent, so the other ones we looked at, keeping your door closed, it won't prevent the fire, but it can prevent the fire from getting into your room. And it will reduce the damage. Keeping the stovetop nice and clean could prevent the fire from starting because there's no extra fuel for that burner to heat up on. The oven mitts, they are a form of prevention. Right? You can stop yourself from getting burned if you use oven mitts. And if you did happen to get burned, let's say the pan was super, super hot or there was a little hole in the oven mitt, at least the damage would be less to your hands. Preparedness. So preparedness is the things we do to get ready for something to happen. It's the plans that we make, it's the equipment that we have, and it's the training that we do. So plans. We want to have a couple of different kinds of plans. We want to have a plan for how to put out a fire. So that's kind of what's our plan if a fire starts? What do we do? And then we want to have an evacuation plan. We'll talk about that more in a bit. But we want to have different kinds of plans. Evacuation plan, a response plan, maybe a communication plan. Think about the different kinds of things you want to plan or think about. Equipment. Well, what resources do we need? We want to have a fire extinguisher ready. Maybe we want to have some baking soda. We probably have that in our kitchen anyways. Let's keep it handy. Lids for our pots. We want to have a smoke detector, smoke alarms, things like that to help us know when there's a fire. And if you have rooms on the second floor or, quite a bit above ground, you might want to have an escape ladder because we'll talk about having two means of escape out of every room. Oven mitts is some equipment you want to have handy in the kitchen. So think about all those different things you need. And then training, practice, practice, practice. Whether you're in school and you practice fire drills and fire evacuations, you should practice it at your house too. So, think about, let's plan, what are the two ways to get out of each room? And then do a practice and say, okay, there's a fire outside the front door. How do you get out of the house? Why, use the back door. Great. There's a fire outside the window. Where do you go? I go out the door. There's a fire outside the door. I go out the window. Things like that. Practice, practice, practice. Now, we said an extinguisher is something that we want to have, but there are different types because there's different types of fires. So the most common ones are type A, B, and C. Type A, I always think of it's anything that leaves ash. You burn some wood and paper and there's all that ash left over afterwards. That's type A. You could use water on that type of fire and different chemicals or products that are good for type A. Type B, that's liquids. I always think B for boiling, like a witch boiling a big pot of oil. Or again, I was just watching some Viking movies and they dump boiling oil on the invaders. Well, that's type B. You wouldn't want to put water on that type because it wouldn't put it out and it would just splash the flaming liquid all over the place. Type C, that's electricity. C for current, an electrical current. So that you don't want to use water on that either because water conducts electricity. So if you were, that picture we have where that power bar is on fire, if you were to spray water on that or throw water, there's a chance that you could get electrocuted and burned. So you don't want to do that. But what happens if I unplug that power bar? If you can safely unplug it, now it's no longer energized. There's no more electrical current. So it's just whatever's burning, the plastic, the rubber. So then you could use maybe a different extinguisher type. The good news is your extinguishers, when you go to buy one, it'll say what type it is. There'll be some numbers, but the big thing to look at is the letters. It'll say A or B or BC or ABC. So if you go in and get a type ABC fire, you can fire extinguisher, you can use it on any of the ABC fires: wood, paper, oil, gas, something that's electrical or energized. So again, just look for the ABC plans. Let's talk about that. So you need a plan for what to do if you see a fire. And the first thing would be call 911. Let the fire department know. Get them coming. Even if you manage to put it out before they get there, that's okay. They're not going to be mad at you. They can check to make sure that it is out. They can look to see if there are any other fires. And they can maybe help with smoke removal and different things like that. So get the firefighters coming first. Call 911. And then you can look. And if it's a small fire, and if you're trained maybe in how to use a fire extinguisher, or you think it's safe to try and put that fire out, then you can try and put it out. Put the lid on the pot, use the fire extinguisher, things like that. But let's say it's too big, or it's getting big fast and it's too dangerous, or you're too scared. Then you need a plan to evacuate and get out of that house or that room. But because the first thing you did was call 911, you know that help is on the way, and now you can get out. So let's talk about evacuation plan. You want to have 2 ways out of each room in your house. So if we look at the plan up here that someone drew of their house, we see there's a solid red line with an arrow, and there's a dashed or dotted red line. They show where their smoke alarms are. They show their different rooms. So let's look at the kitchen area. It has a solid red line going out this door. So that's the primary exit, the first way they're going to try. But if that way is not safe or is blocked, the dotted line is their alternative exit. And if we look at each room, whether it's the bathroom, the primary way out, the first way they'll try is out the door. But if the fire's outside of that door, they will go out the window. And each of these rooms has 2 ways out. Very important. And then they have their meeting place shown. The picture here shows this young fellow putting an escape ladder out an upper floor window. And then the ladder's deployed. So that's his second way out of that room. When you're picking your meeting place, try and think about, where are the responders going to come? Where is it safe to meet? So in this picture here, there's a big green space, but it is on the other side of the street. So that might be the best spot to go. But just remember, if you're running across the street, there could be cars coming, there could be fire trucks coming, all sorts of things. So you might want to have your meeting place on the same side of the street as your house, so that you can just run across the lawns of your neighbors or go down the sidewalk and not have to have more danger by crossing the street. But have a meeting place. Maybe you say, we'll meet at the slide in the playground, or we'll meet, at my friend's house 3 doors down, or meet by the big tree on the corner, or the stop sign on the corner, or at the local store, someplace like that, so that if you have to evacuate, you can all meet up. You might be going out different windows or different exits. You all know where you're going to meet up. Response. So that's dealing with the fire. And again, you want to call 911, get help coming, get the fire department coming. And then what do you do after that? Do you put the lid on the pot? Do you grab the extinguisher, pull the pin, aim at the base of the fire, squeeze and sweep? Pass. Pull, aim, squeeze, sweep. Do you do that? Maybe you try all those things, or maybe the fire is already too big by the time it's discovered and you just have to evacuate. But that's part of your response. Recovery. So that's what we do afterwards. So we want to think about, did we use anything that we have to replace or get recharged or fixed? Your fire extinguisher. Normally, a lot of them have a little dial that shows the pressure, and the needle might be in the green for good. After you use it, the needle will be down in the red and it'll say recharge. So you want to take that fire extinguisher in and get it recharged so it's ready to go in case you need it again. Maybe you used baking soda, so you have to get more baking soda. What do you need to do differently so that maybe it won't happen in the future? Maybe you said, well, why did this fire start? Well, my stovetop was really dirty. Okay, well, lesson learned. keep your stovetop clean. Maybe you had lots of paper or garbage around the stove. Maybe you took the pot off the stove and tried to put it in the sink, and you had curtains by the window by your sink and they caught fire. Don't do that again. Or get rid of the curtains. Or don't take the pot off the stove. Put the lid on it. Maybe you didn't have the lid handy. So now you know, have the lid handy when I'm cooking. What do you have to do in recovery? Again, get your equipment ready again. Change things if you have to try and make sure it doesn't happen again. That's it, folks. Thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed it. Like, share, and subscribe. Talk more soon.